first Ugandan ever to qualify as a UK chartered tax advisor. And I enjoyed tax so much that became my career for the next 27 years. Tax is very interesting because it sits at the interface of almost everything. So if you look at tax just from a technical perspective and you just stay in that very narrow lane, you are going to miss out. I then embarked on a very interesting challenge of getting the Revenue Authority to also up their game. And I can say honestly that I was a very big thorn in their side for quite some time. And the first battle there was bonus shares are dividends. And I said, no, bonus shares are not dividends. Zain sells to Airtel. Zain was a Netherlands company and big transaction of about $300 million if I remember. So URA issues an assessment of $89 million USD. And I take on that assignment and tell them that actually, according to the Uganda-Netherlands Double Taxation Treaty, there's no capital gain arising here. Startup costs, when the first IPO in Uganda, that was BAT, we said you don't only give exemption for startup costs, but also IPO costs should be exempt from tax. Oil and gas taxation, an entire section that was written with my support. MTN, Airtel, Zain, Celtel, the oil and gas story, beer breweries he's been talking about. As for the banks, all the mergers and acquisitions that happened in the mid-2012s to about 2018, I was part of that. For young professionals, it's very important that you kind of get into the habit of distinguishing who you are from what you do, so that when what you do changes, you do not lose your identity. Credentials will open the door for you. Competence will earn you a seat at the table. What you want is to stay in the room. It is character which will make you stay in the room. Character, we're talking about integrity, we're talking about values, reliability, respect, and all those things that we used to call the soft things, which are actually the hard things. I did everything that I ever wanted to do, but I also had to leave something for you guys to also do. So I want to be remembered as that person who made a difference, a positive difference in whoever it is that I met and interacted with.
So Francis, you're welcome to the 6th edition of the Tax Nights. Before you here are very young people, eager faces all looking at you. Some may have seen you in around Kampala. Some are here seeing you for the first time. Others have seen you in the papers. And I think the biggest question on everybody's mind is, who is Francis? Who are you, not what you do? You taught me that one. Who are you, not what you do?
Okay, Christo, thank you very much for the introduction. Who is Francis Kamulegeya? Before I answer that question, I also want to think of that very same question being asked of you. And there are two questions, actually. One is, who is, let me pick on Zalwango. Who is Zalwango? And before even you answer that question, the second question is, what do you do? So you think about those two questions and think of how you would answer who you are without talking about what you do. Because what you do is not who you are. For young professionals, it's very important that you kind of get into the habit of distinguishing who you are from what you do, so that when what you do changes, you do not lose your identity. So Francis Kamulegeya, there are certain things that are of me which do not change regardless of whether I'm in PwC or MTN or Old Mutual. I'm a Christian. Say hi for Jesus. I'm a father, husband. I like hanging out with young people because I'm now old. So when you're with young people like her, and then younger people like those, then you sort of look also a bit fresh, much as your senior. But most importantly, I'm somebody who is very, very curious. I always asking myself, why is whatever it is the way it is? And because of that, Crystal calls me a disruptor. Last time she even called me a terrorist. But a person who loves life. I believe life is for living, and you only have one chance at it. And most importantly, I like sharing whatever I know, and I like giving back, because whenever you play it forward, it keeps going. There's no point holding knowledge without sharing it, because nobody knows what you know until you share it. Other than that, I did have a full-time job at some point. Very, very, very interesting job. I think she's going to talk about it at some point. But it's really an exciting time for me, because people have been struggling to give me titles, now have the perfect title. I'm a published author. Hey, hey, hey. There are lots of authors here who are writing their notes that, writing in your notebook, that is an author. But whether that will be published is another story. So I can't be referred to as a former this or former that, because I'm so current and I'm so present. I can't be described as a former.
Thank you, Francis. Now, Francis, you've had an illustrious career. 27 years in PwC. Before that, you worked in the UK in an accounting practice. But what most people don't know about you here is that you studied agriculture at Makerere University. Was it Makerere? Yes, was Cabanero, Makerere University. Yes, Makerere University. And then someone wonders, how does an agriculturalist who spends time looking at trees, forests, and whatever in university, how do you end up in the corporate world of accounting? So just take us through your journey, your career.
Okay, I didn't even know I was an agriculturalist. I'm a farmer, because actually now I do farm and produce stuff. But spending 3 years at university studying agriculture, that makes me an agriculturalist. I honestly don't know, but I studied botany, I studied crop science. I can walk into a room and I look at a plant like that and I say that is Lantana camara. Then I look at a tree, the other one I say Ficus natalensis. Then I see a fly going around and I say that is Papiliodemodocus. That's entomology, yeah. And then I look on the other side and I can look at a rock and I tell you whether that is what type of soil that is. And that was my life from 1987 to 1990. 1987 to 1990. They were not born, yes. Yeah. And you are not born as well, which is a good thing, because for you guys who are very young, you have so much time ahead of you. 30 years from now, you'll be talking like me, because I'm going to be 60 next year. And if you are, if you are below 40, then, you could be listening to your grandfather right now talking to you. But that's, so moving from agriculture to tax, it was never a straight journey. After I graduated with a BSc in agriculture, the next job I did was to trade in maize. And I was a maize trader in Masaka, a place called Imbirizi. I would buy maize from farmers and then sell it to Produce Marketing Board. And it's a story I tell in my book. And the thing that made me quite unique in that business was, as somebody who had studied agriculture, I could tell the difference between the moisture content of a maize grain by biting through it with my front teeth. And then I decide whether we should buy it or not. I did that for 6 months. And afterwards, I didn't know what you do after graduating from agriculture, because I never asked for that course at university. They gave it to me and I didn't say no to it. I did it. After I did it, I went into the world to discover myself. So I started my career in accounting in 1992. That was in UK, England, London to be specific. Between 1991 and June 1992, I did every job that exists in this hotel. I cooked potatoes, I cleaned toilets, I was a lifeguard at a swimming pool, I was a car parking attendant, I did some mini cab driving as in Uber, I cleaned whatever that needed to be cleaned. I even worked as a relief driver for school. And one time, the lady that I used to work with did not turn up, and I did a double shift, meaning I drove the van to deliver food at school. And when we got to school, I had to change and wear a white apron and a white hat, and I was the dinner lady. And I got paid double. And I had to do that because I needed to raise about 5,400 pounds to be able to enroll in college. And within 18 months, I had more than what I needed. Enrolled in college, got work permit, got permanent UK residence, and started accounting in 1992. 1994, I had a diploma in accounting. It's called NVQ. I started wearing a suit and tie and go on the train and work in London as an accounts assistant. Enrolled ACCA immediately. 1996, graduated, joined PwC, and in 1996, they changed the tax system in the UK, introduced what is called self-assessment. I liked it so much that I became one of the star performers in what was Coopers and Lybrad back then. It was in Croydon. And they enrolled me on a Chartered Institute of Taxation. It's the premier qualification for tax professionals in the UK. For the record, I'm the first Ugandan ever to qualify as a UK Chartered Tax Advisor. And I enjoyed tax so much that became my career for the next 27 years until I looked at some very smart people in PwC back then, and they wanted their space. I was overstaying. And in June 2022, I left the stage, and I'm so happy that 3 of them are here. That's Crystal was there, Pamela was the partner, and Mr. Trevor Lukanga there, Bwanika, is one of them. But there are several, James Muwiru, I see Sewagala, and lots of them. So agriculture to tax, agriculture was just a university degree. And even now, if you ask me, I'm a director in 6 companies, you say, hey, from agriculture to a board chairman, how does that work? You can also ask me, from agriculture to growing coffee, how does that work? I think life is for living, and there are so many things that you can do if you allow yourself to keep disrupting yourself and learn new things, because until you stop breathing, you can only be the one to put limits on yourself.
Thank you, Francis. So clearly, we have someone here who knows the hustle. He knows the hustle. He's not just corporate, but he's walked that journey. By the way, my first job, I was a hawker. I hawked sweets. Honestly, my first job was that of a hawker in my S6 vacation, hawking sweets for Britannia. It was not an easy job, but I did it. I needed the money for university. So Francis, I've read your book. I recommend this book. I've read it cover to cover. And in this book, you tell us about your journey and especially when you came back to Uganda, how you came in and assessed the tax system in Uganda and got in and began to, in your own quiet way, make a difference and turn things upside down. And you saw that table, you didn't like how it was set, and you flipped it the other way around. And I'd like to hear from you, what has stood out for you the most in your journey as a tax practitioner at the top of the game here in Uganda? What stood out for you over the last 30 years or so?
Yeah, so in UK, I was a chartered tax advisor, and we had a fully fledged proper tax practice within PwC. When I came to Uganda, that was in 2000, tax was like a poor cousin of audit in the big firms that were working. And it did not have the kind of presence that I was used to in the UK. The firms were even called auditing firms. I've actually never done audit as in being an auditor in my life. I did finance and accounting when I was training as an accountant. Then from there, I went into taxation. So I was challenged, but I also saw a major opportunity within the practice. So when I joined PwC in 2000, the firm was about 60 people. Tax alone was about, I think, 6 or 7 people. So I had to start from working from within to really get people to appreciate that actually tax is a separate line of service as opposed to supporting audit and assurance. And in Kenya, the practice was a bit bigger. So there was quite a lot of support from the region in growing the tax practice here in Uganda. Then the next thing was to get the people in Uganda Revenue Authority to understand that actually there is a practice and a profession called tax consulting. This business of writing letters and say our position remains the same when you were just a former customs officer who then was transitioned to URA because URA was relatively young. I think in 2000, they had only been around for about 10 years. VAT had only been introduced in 1996, so it had only been around for 4 years. So there, and I talk about them in my book, there were people who in the Revenue Authority actually never knew tax law, but there were the people there because when the Revenue Authority was set up as a separate statutory body, then those people who were working on the board as customs people suddenly moved into the URA. So after setting up the structures within the firm, I then embarked on a very interesting challenge of getting the Revenue Authority to also up their game. And I can say honestly that I was a very big thorn in their side for quite some time. And having said that, those who appreciated did appreciate, and the transformation of the tax practice started from there. And when I saw that question, I just made some notes here and just allow me to refer to it because you young people, you know the law. So if you reflect on the Income Tax Act, in 2004, there was a new Financial Institutions Act, which required banks to raise their minimum capital unimpaired by losses. And the expectation was that investors were going to put more money in the banks. But many of the banks were quite profitable. So I came up with an idea to several of our banks that had profits that we should issue bonus shares and use the retained reserves to capitalize the banks. It's something that I'd seen in the UK. It's something allowed in company law. It was a major surprise to the Revenue Authority. And the first battle there was bonus shares are dividends. And I said, no, bonus shares are not dividends. Bonus actually reserves. Already they belong to companies as retained reserves, only that now we are issuing them shares, but they still remain the property of the shareholders. They lost that battle. And the next thing, they changed the law to define dividends to include bonus shares. And if you look at Section 2 of the Income Tax Act, dividend includes bonus shares. That was in 2004. Then in 2010, there was the famous Zain International. Zain sales to Airtel. Zain was a Netherlands company and big transaction of about 300 million US dollars, if I remember. So URA issues an assessment of 89 million USD. And I take on that assignment and tell them that actually, according to the Uganda-Netherlands Double Taxation Treaty, there's no capital gain arising here. You do not have the right to tax this gain. A few of them, that was the first time they knew about the treaty. The famous, they sections have changed so much, but the famous Section 885, underlying ownership and beneficial ownership, they lost that case and they went on to change the law, and we now know how they determine and interpret the concept of underlying ownership. In 2012, the bank which I chair now, I&M Bank, was majority owned by a very good friend of mine, Ketan Mojaria. He brings on board private sector, private equity to partner with him, and he sells some of his shares to them. And Revenue Authority gets very, very excited because it was very widely publicized in the papers. And then they come up with an assessment for capital gains tax. The original provision of the law was Section 21(1)(k), which said that exempt income includes disposal of shares in a company that is a private company. And also the concept of a business asset does not include a share held in a private company. We spent 6 months fighting that. They lost, and then they went on to amend Section 21(k). I don't know what the section is right now. And when you sell shares in a private company, you pay, it's a business asset. It's a long list. 2012, we were in Jinja, commissioning Bujagali power project with His Highness the Aga Khan, the late His Excellency was there, and lots of other people. And Excellency challenges the Aga Khan to set up an airline in Uganda. The Aga Khan agrees promptly, but he says we need to have the right economic environment and commercial environment in the country. And they asked me, this is our advisor, what would we be appropriate, and say tax exemption. And Section 21 is amended to include income derived from operating an aircraft. Then Qatar comes, Emirates comes, SN Brussels comes, and they wanted the exemption. Then we say, oh, the airline has to be registered and owned in Uganda. And that continues to this day. I can go on and on. Startup costs, when the first IPO in Uganda, that was BAT, we said you don't only give exemption for startup costs, but also IPO costs should be exempt from tax. Transfer pricing, Crystal was part of that journey in 2011. Oil and gas taxation, an entire section that was written with my support. I, in fact, had to go to the FAD, Fiscal Affairs Department in IMF, Washington, D.C., to discuss that with IMF and IMF as our technical supporters. All these other provisions, exemption of hydropower projects, transfer of a going concern, private ruling was one of the most interesting battles I had with the Revenue Authority, because Hits Telecom, you may not have heard of it, sold its business to Orange in 2007. And the Revenue Authority thought that a business is a company. And I told him, no, a business is an enterprise. And we went on and on and on about that. Eventually, I prevailed, and then they had to issue a practice note which explains the conditions for a transfer of a going concern. So there was nothing more for me to do. I did everything that I ever wanted to do, but I also had to leave something for you guys to also do.
Thank you, Francis. A hand clap for Francis and his. We really had very interesting transformational projects. I remember when I joined PwC in 2007, Francis called me in his office to give me my first assignment. No, that was the second assignment. And he told me, we need to prepare a position paper at Ministry of Finance to support the beer industry in Uganda. I asked him, the beer industry? Says yes, they want special relief for beer that is going to be made from local raw materials. I said, no, Francis, we cannot do that. He asked me why. I said, those are drunkards. They are drunkards. Why do you want to support drunkards? No, we cannot do that kind of project. He looked at me and he told me, you know what? Well, right now we are going to support the beer industry to manufacture beer from local raw materials. I need you to go and prepare a position paper. I had to go and start thinking of how I'm going to start supporting drunkards to advance their interest. But I mean, that was revolutionary because we now see beer being made from all kinds of products: maize, sorghum, cassava, and supporting the farmers right down from all your villages where you come from. So Francis, thank you so much for that, for walking us through the changes and the impact and transformation you've had in the tax space. Well, we have so many young people here listening to you and wondering, and I always ask myself that same question, Ochikolotia, how do you do it? How are you able to bring about all this change and transformation? And for the people who are here listening in, perhaps the question they're asking, how do I equip myself? What kind of skills do I need to move from point A to point B and ultimately have such a successful and significant career?
I can only say what I did and what worked for me, and then if there's anything to learn from it, you can pick from the various nuggets and tidbits. In the first place, as a tax professional, practitioner, whether your background is law or accounting, tax is very, very interesting because it sits at the interface of almost everything. Business, enterprise, accounting, finance. So if you look at tax just from a technical perspective and you just stay in that very narrow lane, you are going to miss out. So the first thing is to understand the environment in which you practice as a practitioner and a professional. Number two, you need to understand business. And whether you like it or not, you cannot succeed as a tax professional if you do not understand business. And if you ask me what is business, you know what business is, because tax does not apply in a vacuum or isolation. Clients do not come to you for tax memos and tax opinions and draft papers, and they pay you for that. That's not a deliverable. You just communicate through a report or an opinion, but to solve a problem. So my mantra, which I learned very, very early, before I met all these good young friends of mine, was a training I got from a lady. She's called Barbara Minto. She used to be a partner or analyst with McKinsey, and she even wrote a book. It's called The Pyramid Principle. And Barbara told us that as a consultant and a professional, whether you're a lawyer, engineer, architect, doctor, you name it, there are four P's. So a person comes to you and they give you a brief. That brief she calls a position. Somebody explains to you the position that she or he is in, whether they've received an assessment, whether there's fraud that has happened in their business, whether they've had an accident and, there's trouble potentially from police. So you have to stop and understand that position. You young people, you are very, very clever. At times you rush to solutions. At times you want to show how bright and knowledgeable you are. But it's very, very, very important to just take a few steps back and understand what is being presented to you, even listening for those things that are not being shared. Now, the moment a position is properly comprehended, and this was my method, then the next thing is to appreciate what is the problem, because they've got an assessment, which is the position, and for that matter, they are not comfortable with it or they're worried. They're asking them for a lot of money, and that's the problem. And you then need to focus on solving that problem, but you cannot solve a problem that you do not understand. And you cannot understand that problem in isolation. You have to understand it in its context. Because as a tax professional, the same answer may be correct for one problem, but actually it's not correct for the other problem. Yet actually it is the same opinion, it's the same solution. So position, problem, and then from there, you now get into your thinking side of things, precedents, research, and collaboration, consultation. And the third P is called proposals. or you can call it recommendations. But at the end of the day, it is the client to decide what it is that they're going to take on board. Then when it came to doing work, especially when you're tendering or you're going through a competitive process, I like simplicity, and that thing has really worked for me. So I would look at an opportunity and I say, how are we going to beat competition here? And I coined the 4 E's. So everything that you do on behalf of a client, you are applying 4 E's, or in my case, it was 4 E's. 1, I can do something very, very, very efficiently. And for that matter, I can charge less without compromising on the quality. And that is something as basic as a tax computation. So it's automated and we can do it very clever. We can do it with a lower level members of staff with lower cost because we're training them. And on efficiency, you could not beat me. Then the next is the E. The second E was expertise. Now, we built expertise in our firm. Crystal was the expert in transfer pricing before even people knew about transfer pricing in this market. She went to UK on train on secondment for 2 years and came back as the expert, but she didn't think she was an expert until I told her that you are the expert, and she had to raise up to that. Pamela was the expert in our oil and gas, and she continues in that space up to now. And I'll use these 3 people who are here. Pamela is not here. Trevor was in Pamela went to the UK for 2 years. Trevor was in South Africa for 4 years, I think. We had actually to go and extract him back because we were sent here on secondment to come back eventually and serve us here. International tax, mergers and acquisition, and all sorts of other things. So we built that expertise very, very early in our practice, and it made us very competitive in that space because every new investment that was coming to in the country, we were the gateway to that, and we were synonymous with myself as an individual through writing in the newspapers and speaking at events and various other conferences and forums. So efficiency, how efficient are you in whatever it is that you're doing? What level of expertise do you have in your so-called tax practice, whatever you call it? And exposure. Exposure makes the difference because even in her role right now as the chair in the Tax Appeals Tribunal, there's hardly anything that you'll bring which she has not seen, either through research, through precedents, through reading. And that exposure also makes a very, very, very big difference as a practitioner. Exposure, expertise, efficiency, and experience. So if I tell you I've done this, I mean, I look around this market and I look at the telecom sector. I advised on Airtel's, heat selling to Orange. Many of you may even not know about Orange. I advised on Orange selling to Vodafone. I advised on Vodafone selling to Afrexim. I advised on Afrexim exiting when things were not working. Yeah. MTN, Airtel, Zain, Celtel, the oil and gas story is beer breweries he's been talking about. As for the banks, all the mergers and acquisitions that happened in the mid 2012s to about 2018, I was part of that. So you as young professionals, number one, do not allow yourself to become so comfortable with what you know, because that can limit the possibilities for you. Number two, you have to be willing to disrupt yourself and learn new things. Number three, you have to understand the context in which you apply your advice all the time, even to the extent that you are ready and willing to unlearn what may have worked some 3-4 years ago. And after that, you cannot fail. There's no way you can fail unless you allow yourself to fail. It worked for me, and I think it can work for you. You're younger, you are more experienced, you have MBAs and lots of other things. I only have 1 degree. Yes, you even have AI. Yeah. My AI was in agriculture. And the first one, the The first one is artificial, just like yours, because yours is artificial intelligence. Mine was artificial. Who can guess the second I? It's something to do with that. What is it? It is artificial insemination. Yes, that was my AI in agriculture.
Well, thank you, Francis. And so what I've picked from you is problem solving. We need to learn problem solving skills and to approach problem solving in a structured manner. And the importance of building expertise and specializing. Now, all that is on a technical front. I remember in the first 3 or 5 years of my career with PwC, there's a time when the bulk of the work we did was compliance based. Tax returns, even health checks that was advisory, but mainly preparing tax returns, preparing computations and the like. But I remember that you decided you were intentional about a shift, and you said we need to now move towards advisory, and that is when you began to send many of us into different on secondment. And for me, the question I'm asking is, how do you transition? How do you move from technical to thinking strategically, to thinking as a leader, to looking at the next 5 years down the line? Because in here we have people who are leading practices, who are leading law firms, accounting practices. So how do you move from being technical to being not just a leader, but one who has to be visionary to think about the next 5 years, so that you're keeping in tandem with a changing landscape?
Yeah, I think you do that by seeing the big picture, because whatever it is that you learned at school, at university, at LDC, wherever it is you learned your thing, it is not for you to keep. It is to be applied. When we were young in our days, we used to say knowledge is power. But it's later on when I got a bit more exposure that I realized knowledge is not power. Knowledge is potential power. It's until you apply that knowledge that actually you have power. Because you look around this room, if somebody was to ask what you guys know a lot of stuff, but nobody cares until you talk about it or you apply it or show it. And that's why when people are introducing themselves, they start talking about the MBAs and LLMs and all those things that they have. So what? So you have to apply what you know to solve important problems, and people are willing to pay you for that. Otherwise, when you give me your business card with so many initials after it, I say, you've spent a lot of time at school. I really hope that you are going now to spend more time in the real world and apply whatever it is that you learned, because that is when you start putting value on the table and also being of value to society. So if you're running your practice big, small, medium, and the intention is for it not to end with you, then you have to see beyond the here and now and do things that are going to enable that business to succeed in the future when you're there, and most importantly, hopefully to continue after you. Because it's very easy to talk about the likes of PwC. Price Waterhouse was a person. Coopers was a person. There were Cooper brothers. They set up this firm just like any of the 3, 4, 10 partner firm you can think of here. That was the firm 168 years ago. I don't even know that they have any 10th or 15th generation or from that family working in these firms. So it is all about continuity. And that is why you should not be so comfortable with the technical knowledge, but you should always be looking to apply that technical knowledge to solve clients' problems, create value for clients, and even show them opportunities that they may not be aware of, because clients will be very ready and willing to pay you for that good work done. So technical knowledge is just the baseline. I coined, like I said, I like simplicity. So I coined another 3, 4. Actually, I work in terms of 4s. Another 4 C's. So the first C, I call it credentials. Credentials is what you would call qualifications. Those things that we flaunt. They're very important. They show we went to school. They show we are learned. But from there, what can you do with those credentials? The next C is the competence, because you've got this qualification and as a result, you've applied it somewhere and you are competent. And that level of competence gives somebody confidence to trust you with their matter, because not only do you have the credentials, which are the qualifications, but also you have proven competence that you can solve this problem. Now, from there on, you not only need the competence, but also you have the capability. So if you're just competent as the partner, managing partner, but you don't have capability within your team, that's not going to take you anywhere. And it's for that reason that however small the practice is, once you have aspirations of it to grow beyond 1 man, 5 people, 10 people, you have to create capability within your teams, and you have to create what I call the capital T, the depth in terms of expertise and the breadth in terms of exposure and experience. And then the third and the fourth C is the space where I'm now playing, is character. Credentials will open the door for you. Competence will earn you a seat at the table. What you want is to stay in the room. It is character which will make you stay in the room. Character, we're talking about integrity, we're talking about values, reliability, respect, and all those things that we used to call the soft things, which are actually the hard things. So however competent you are as a lawyer and tax professional, your character could fail you. However qualifications you are as a professional tax consultant, if you don't have integrity, if you're not reliable, if you're not trustworthy, you don't say you don't do what you said you're going to do, you'll not succeed. And in this day and age of instant gratification and so much noise, whether it's from social media, whether it's from flying jets, which we've had lately as they practice for their drills, whether it's whatever it is, you have to find a way to stay grounded as a professional, because people put trust in you to solve their problems. And at times they only give you one chance. And you fail, not only do they take the business away from you, they also tell other people. And you may struggle to recover from that.
Thank you, Francis. Character, integrity, professionalism. And I read this book from cover to cover, and one of my favorite statements in this book is that leadership is about refusing to lower your standards, even when it makes you unpopular. Respect is not earned through fear, but through professionalism, consistency, and courage in the face of dysfunction. I love that statement. Well, Francis, you've had a fantastic career. You are the top of your game, and you were country senior partner Uganda. You were on the governance board of PwC Africa. You had it all. Then one day you woke up and said, "I'm leaving all this behind." And I remember when you broke the news to some of us and told us, "By the way, I'm going to be out of here in this number of years." Some of us thought you were joking. You're like, "Where are you going?" This is your business, And then you went to Thailand, came back looking 10 years younger, and I think 3 years later you are out of the business. So what informed that decision to up and go?
Okay, first of all, I was never meant to be there forever. And I don't think anybody is meant to be anywhere forever. Secondly, as you rightly said, I was part of the system. So in addition to being country senior partner, PwC Uganda, or managing partner, PwC Uganda, I was a member of the PwC Africa Board of Governance Board. And that is the body which is in charge of governance of the practice within Africa. And we were 12 of us. Again, I talk about my first, the first Ugandan to serve on that board for the whole of Africa. And so it's at that level where we decide partner compensation, partner admission, retirement age, and all the major things that keep the firm going and have kept the firm going for 180 years plus. And I never, ever wanted to be pushed out by a system simply because of a number, that number being age, and that age being 60. Because at 60, you say that's the retirement age in PwC. But what happens to me when I'm 60? Because I've been doing very, very well, and I'm not even stopping to do what I'm doing. So I sit there waiting for just the clock to tick, and I turn 60, and then you have a party for me, and I go. I say, I'm not that kind of person, because for me, it's not about living, it's about where I'm going. So from the moment I joined the firm, and I've been very, very intentional. So I used to work with the firm in the UK for 5 years, joined in 1996, came to Uganda in the year 2000, and my target was to make partner in 5 years. And in 2005, I was a partner. And after that, my target was to rise up to the more senior levels within the firm, get away from the technical work, and at some point I stopped doing tax. In fact, by the time I left the firm, I was doing mainly consulting and human resource advisory work. During the lockdown, something I talk about in the book, I did a lot of HR consulting to the point of recruiting 19 board members, stroke CEO, stroke EDs in this market, of which 13 were ladies. Something that I'm very, very proud of. So you will transition. You transition on your own terms, or you become a victim of a system. And somebody who has something to offer beyond whatever it is that they've been doing so many years, I think it's only fair that you transition on your own terms. And at times we need to connect the dots. There are certain things that we do and we don't quite connect the dots. And I'll give you a very good example. Here, as you order your menu, somebody may order chips, somebody orders pizza. I see somebody eating greens and grass and all those things. And everybody knows what works for them. But I know you young people are very, very conscious when it comes to health, wellness, exercise, and diet. And the reason why you are that conscious is because you want to be healthy, which is great. And if you're healthy, it means you'll be well. And if you're well, it means you are likely to have a very long life. And long life, stroke longevity, means staying on earth for very many years. Now, if you tell me that you're going to be doing what you're doing now at 32, which is so exciting, but you think you'll be doing that the very same thing at 62, then you need to reboot yourself and make sure that you're prepared for the long life. So you have to be prepared to lead a life which is going to include what I call a portfolio of careers. You are going to transition out of legal, consulting, taxation, and even go into jewelry and perfume making. Not even importing perfume, but this time mixing it yourself. Maybe herbal perfume. Who knows? So I was very clear that there are lots of things I wanted to do over and above what I'd done in PwC. I also had a clear definition of what success was to me. And I don't shy away from being very open and honest and saying I've been very, very successful in my career, socially, financially, emotionally, whatever alley you can think of. But why was I? Because I have what I call the concept of enough. Now, if you're very lucky and you define that concept, and it's not stagnant, it is keeps shifting, because you have to be ambitious, you have to be aspirational, but because you know what is your enough. After doing everything that I did in PwC, all the influence in terms of policy, all the thought leadership, all the mentoring and training, and looking back, seeing what I've been able to achieve, and then looking forward and seeing how all these good people of mine are going to play this forward, having lifted all these young professionals as I rise, I had to leave the stage when I was at the height of that career, because it then means you're still relevant. Most importantly, you have a lot of social capital. To me, it was never about leaving PwC. It was about going to do other things. And if was to start talking about those other things, there are just so many. And I'm so busy, and I'm so happy, and I'm so fulfilled. But most importantly, I'm not a former anything, because I'm so current and I've got so much going on for me. And inshallah, I hope I'm around for another 30 years so that you guys can still come back and say, hey, Mzee, hey, you remember those days? And I say, hey, I'll be in Masaka. I will not be here in Fairway Hotel.
Well, well, well. Well, let's talk about those other things, because one thing I like about you, Francis, is that you're a man of all seasons. And on Monday, you are the serious boss, no jokes. How much money are you bringing in, Crystal? Why is this client not paying? What is happening on this project? Then by Wednesday, you're beginning to chill out a bit. You bring us avocado from the farm, matoke, bananas. Then Friday, you're in real full mood. You're the DJ at the staff party. You're dressed like Michael Jackson. So and that really reflects your entire life, because Monday to Friday you're in PwC wearing a suit. Weekends you're in Masaka on the coffee garden with a hoe, you're digging and drying your coffee. Other weekends you have time to playing and with kids, being Santa Claus and the clown. And tell us about these other interests, specifically Masaka School for the Deaf, which has been very close to your heart, and time to play.
So those projects were, I'll be telling a lie if I just said, that was a business plan and I set out to do this and did a proposal and costed it and ran a spreadsheet. No. Masaka School for the Deaf is a very, very long story. It's a whole chapter in this book. But I left Masaka in 1978. I was 12 years. And 12 years? Yes, 12 years, maybe, 67, 78, 11 years. And it was after the war. These are things that you've been hearing. We used to have those Saba, the war that got rid of Idi Amin. But I was in primary 6, and there was a village mate, a boy of my age, who was deaf, never went to school, but I never thought much about that. And so I left Masaka in 1978, went to completed P7 here in Kampala, Nansana to be exact, went to Namasagali College for 6 years, went to Mackay University for 3 years, went to England for 10 years. Then this dear friend of mine who I last saw in 1978, I met him again in 2003, almost 25 years after. He remembered me. I couldn't remember him. Then through sign language interpreter, I got to know who he was, continued to meet up with him and hear his story. He was so keen to hear my story, because this is a boy I'd grown up with in the village, barefoot, playing football, and being all sorts of naughty young boys for those of us who grew up in the village. And through the numerous interactions, he said something that really challenged me big time. I was a senior manager in PwC, and he told me through sign language interpreter that the difference between me and him is education. And that humbled me. here I was, senior manager on the TV, analyzing the budget, and people thinking that I'm important and calling me this and that. And this guy who I grew up with in the village told me that basically if I hadn't gone to school, I could be like him. In fact, he had a very interesting sense of humor, because when I was asking him about other village mates that we used to play with, he told me most of them had died in their teenage years because of the bad old days of HIV/AIDS in Masaka in the mid-80s. And he told me that he survived because he was not very, very active in that space. And he wasn't that active because, of course, he's deaf. And he told me that because he had never seen me for the last 23 years, he had also assumed that I had died, because everybody else that we used to play with in that village had died. Now, for me, that was like a turning point in my life. And I said, how many other children who are deaf for no fault of their own are not going to school simply because of stigma and ignorance? So that in 2005, I decided to set up Masaka School for the Deaf. That school has been going for the last 21 years. We have provided education for, thank you. We have provided education when we had our 20th anniversary celebration, which was graced by Her Highness the Nabagereka. Our database showed 1,262 deaf learners that had gone through the school, of which 17 have gone all the way to qualify, have gone all the way to graduate at the university. So it's a long story, and I really hope you'll buy the book, because I want you to read that story. And maybe that's when you can also ask yourself what you can do to make a difference. Very often, as technical people, we shy away from making a difference in our communities, saying that that is not my field. So you're a lawyer, and your field is not you're not an educationist, and for that matter, you are not going to help deaf children go to school, but if they have a matter that requires legal support, you can help with it. But you don't even know sign language, so how are you even going to help them? Time to Play is not as heavy a story as this one, but also a very interesting one. 2007, 2005, I think it was. Two of my daughters were living in the UK. They come to visit, and myself and my wife left them at home with our house help, and we went to Masaka to visit family and friends. And they asked our house help, her name is Annette, that can they go to the park and play. These are children from England, and in those outside countries, there is what they call play parks for children. So Annette tells them, one is Gloria, one is Georgia. He says, hey, Gloria, Georgia, park mpya, park enkadde. Now, talk about lost in translation. So as far as Annette was concerned, a park is a tax park. As far as Gloria is concerned, a park is a place where children go and play. And then the argument ensued, and she was explaining Park Mpya actually is more popular, but I don't think you really want to go there. Park Nkadde is so busy, and there's so much going on. And these ones were talking slides and swings and whatever's that they are used to. And I'm one person who, whenever I can do something, I don't dwell on it. I just get up and do it. So when my deaf friend told me he never went to school, and if it wasn't me for not going to school, I could be like him. He was a cobbler. His workstation was a bench on a street in Masaka. I was a senior manager in PwC on transition to become partner. But 23 years ago, we're at the same level, playing in Chimanya, barefoot. There's a game we used to play, it's called Gogolo. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it. And yeah. But those days also, our school uniform was of lastica. What is lastica in English? What is lastica in English? Elastic. Yeah. Is the last, is it? Anyway, our shorts were of, of elastic. So do gogolo, and then when the thing is very dirty, and you're going back home, then you take it off, and then you put the front to back, because there was no zip, there was no buttons, it was just elastic. Elastic? I didn't even know that. You see, I don't know these things. Yeah. So anyway, I used to play it with that dear friend of mine. So the guy told me, if you hadn't gone to school, you'd be like me here. And maybe he's right. If most likely even I would have died during the war or during the bad old HIV days. But for time to play, I just said, where do children go to play? So we live in Nigeria, Kiwatule, and that's the time when Nigeria, Boate, Nalia was becoming very, very heavily developed by the young families. And I decided that I'm going to set up a business, which is for a place where children go to play, and doing it for my children, but also doing for all the other children. So right now we opened time to play in 2009. It's been going for the last 16 years. The children who joined us in 2009 are now in, I think, second year university. And there are lots and lots of children of that generation who's swimming, they learned from that school. Riding a bicycle, they learned from that school. And at some point, I used to have a side hustle where I used to work at time to play on Sundays. And people never got to know that it was me, but I was the one who used to wear the costume for SpongeBob. And I really used to enjoy myself. I don't tell anyone. Yeah, so that is the story for time to play. Now you know.
Wow, thank you, Francis. So, as we wind up, I would like us to talk about this beautiful book that you have written. And then what? How do you say and then what in Uganda? Eh? Kachichi, eh? Reflections on life, leadership, and meaning beyond success. This book is about 400 and something pages. I don't know where you got how you managed to write 400 and something pages, and I don't know how I managed to read 400 but I have read this book cover to cover. It's amazing. And what inspired you to write this book, Francis?
So the inspiration to write the book, I even talk about it in the introduction. So I like telling stories, and I have lots and lots of stories. So as you said earlier on, Monday to Friday in PwC, you have this image of Francis. Then when you come to Masaka, you find a very different version of him. Then you got time to play, you find a different one. Then you got home, you hear stories from my daughters. I've got 4 daughters, and they all have stories about me. You speak to my my siblings, they also have their own stories. So over time, as I was sharing these stories, especially when people come to visit and you've been to Masaka and you know those fireside chats we have, I get encouraged, challenged, inspired. Right? Oh, Francis, you should write a book. I said, a book about what? Those stories. I said, but who is going to read this book? I said, yeah. From agriculture to tax. I said, yeah, but agriculture was just 3 years at the university, for goodness sake. Yeah. And I was at 22 years. How can that define my life? I said, yeah, but there are some people who, after university, they just stay in that lane. Studied law, and for that matter, they're not going to do hairdressing, yet their passion was salon and hairdressing and fashion and design. I say, how sad. Because 3 years at university, whatever you studied, all you did was to get a university degree. And you cannot leave the rest of the world to others, and you just stay in that small pigeonhole. And then all these transitions and all this reinvention and all the disruption. So all I had to do was to just go back and say, okay, at age 7, what was I doing? Age 13, what was I doing? And the thing I wrote up to when I got to the 1990s in the UK, and I didn't even have a title for the book. but it's the stories of my life in the UK, especially the Cheyo, odd jobs and hustling, that when I reflected on it, I then said, actually, I'm that kind of person who has never been lost in the here and now, and is very ready and willing and brave enough to do what it takes to move to point A to B, as opposed to worrying so much about what I studied at university and then trying to be that agriculturist, educationist, plumbist. Is that what they call them? Plumber, yes. I don't even know. At what point do you decide when to use east and when to use AR? Plumber, fashioner, whatever. So, yeah, plumbist, yeah. So I said, okay, I think there's a good story here. But then do it in such a way that a person who reads it also does their own reflection and introspection. But it's also when you then look back at your journey, but most importantly, the success that you've been able to achieve within your own definition of success, but you're not settled, because success to me is not a destination. It just even challenges you more to do something with it. I said, okay, so when you do this and that, then what? I say, if I go to university and get a degree, I'll get a job. Great. Then you get a very good job, and then you do work very, very well, and then what? Then I get a pay rise, and then I get a promotion, and then I'm very comfortable. I say, excellent. So that sounds like very, really interesting. So you work very hard, get a pay rise, and get a promotion, and then what? And then I get a promotion, and then add more money, and then whatever. Buy a car, and then do whatever. And so that ability of asking yourself, and then what, continuously, number one, helps you to stay on the straight and narrow. Number two, it enables you to see beyond the here and now. Number three, it enables you to run your own race. And most importantly, it helps you to envision the end. Because whenever you do whatever you do with the end in mind, you end up cutting out a lot of noise that could distract you. Because you think about yourself here, you look very comfortable, very knowledgeable. You're eating pizza. Some of you are eating soup. Soup, yes. You are drinking soup. What do they do with soup? What do they do? They eat it. You see, they're eating soup, and you're in Fairway Hotel, and you've arrived until somebody walks in here that you went to school with in Navagunga or in Budo, and that guy has packed something there which is quite big and impressive, and just does like, pew, and then it opens, and then pew, pew, and then it's like, and I say, hey, man, hey, that guy has left me. I was like, but you were okay until you saw that thing. Yeah, but now you see, now iPhone 17. You look at what is. You look at the phone is holding. Yeah, so you then become disoriented, disrupted, disorganized. Yeah, and disengaged, simply because you never focused on your. And then what? Because already you knew where you're going until you saw this thing, and now you are running his race because he has a Land Cruiser or he has a Freelander. But you don't even know his blood pressure. You don't even know. Nobody ever talks about those things. Cholesterol. Those things matter. You say, that guy has got that machine. You say, but how about his BP? Do you know the vital statistics? Who cares? Even if you have cholesterol, as long as you're driving an S-Class, who cares? Yeah. So, and then what? You read it. Don't read it as Kamulegeya's story. Read it as your own story, because everything that I've gone through, maybe you've gone through it in your own different way, but it then allows you to have an end in mind, because if everything that you're doing is for yourself, it's likely to end with you, and that would be very, very unfortunate. But if you do things that are going to endure after your time, because your time is finite. It's going to be long, but it's very finite. You live up to 80, 90, that would be a very good age. but you'll be dead for so long because of those people who died so many years ago. Daudi Chua he died so many years ago. He lived for a very short time, Sekawaka, but we continue talking about him. Yeah? So you make sure that you do things that give you fulfillment, that are going to outlive you. That will be the reason for which you existed. And that is why I wrote this book, to share my reflections. And for me, if you ask me, and then what? I think I know the answer. Yeah. Yeah, you bite fast. Yeah. Kupa vibuzo. Kristo. Hey.
That's a very powerful question. And then what? I remember I used to walk into his office with an opinion. And then he would ask me, okay, you've written all this, and then what? And I'm like, what do you mean? And then what are you saying? And then what? And I'd have to go back to the drawing board until I could answer. And then what? At least three times, down the line. So if you couldn't get it after the third, if you couldn't stretch and then what to the third line, then just go back and rewrite the opinion. But that's a very powerful question to ask yourself. And I remember you also, one of the things I learned from you, one of the statements I now use is, stop being, you're busy being busy. What are you doing? I'm busy. Busy doing what? Some of you spend your time being busy, but being busy. So I'm mindful of being intentional about what I do, how I spend my time, instead of just being like a busy helicopter, Hovering. Yes, hovering, but not really being productive. And as we close, Francis, and I don't know if some of you have questions in the audience, but this is the last question I'm asking him. There's a time when you're leaving PwC, you gave me a very little book by Simon Sinek. And you wrote you asked me some questions in that book that changed my life. And one of the questions you already asked, I asked you the same question. Crystal, as you read this book, I want you to reflect on the following things. 1, who are you, not what you do? The second question was, what do you want the people you lead to say about you? And the third question was, what are you really, 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 really good at? I had to really think about what I'm really, really, really good at. And the fourth question, you do things in fours. The fourth question was, how would you like to be remembered? So, Francis, how would you like to be remembered? Answer your own question.
This one is dangerous. So I want to be remembered as that person who made a difference, a positive difference in whoever it is that I met and interacted with. For me, it's not for keeps. Yeah, I only have 2 feet. I can only wear 2 shoes. And I'm not even saying that I don't have other shoes. I do have other shoes, but there's a limit to how much you can just keep having stuff. I get very, very uncomfortable being in the presence of people who are not very well off, and yet I have so much. And in fact, my wife is a very good counterbalance for that, because if it wasn't for her, I think I'd be giving away everything. Yeah, and also that is not a good way of living. But I try and do everything within my powers to make a difference in other people's life. And I would say I want to be the most generous person that I can be within my own means. And I'm trying my very best in that space. And interestingly, the more I give, the more I get. Right now, I serve on 5 boards, and I don't want to say it when she's listening, but I get almost the same amount of money that I used to get as a partner. Only that as a partner, at the end of the year, you do the accounts and then you have a share of profits. But in terms of monthly drawings, wherever you see money coming on the account, and I earn it. And to being a board member is again about giving back and being relevant and serving companies in a manner that is beyond just doing, but ensuring that those companies will continue beyond here and today. So governance roles are very, very different from executive roles. And last year, I went back to school and qualified with a diploma in corporate governance.
Thank you, Francis. I don't see the facilitators here, but do you have any questions from the audience? We'll take a maximum of 3 questions. Otim, are you here? Oh, Ian. Comment, okay?
Thank you. Mine is a comment. I've heard Francis speaking. I must say that whatever he has said is very true, and I'll give my own personal experience from what he has just said. So, when we were still young men, fresh from school, we reached out to Francis. He didn't know us; we had never met, but because he has that heart of giving back, he came and sat with us for about 3 hours. We sat down at Sheraton. Yes. At Sheraton, we sat down and we had an exchange of ideas with him. And from that time on, we've been friends. I can call him and he says, "Hi, Ian." Sometimes I brag, I'm like, I have the country lead of PwC on speed dial. And he will never stop picking up my phone. So I think what he's saying here is not just fiction, so just words. It's actually true of him. And I can testify to that when I was still a young man. Thank you very much, Francis. Now I'm not a young man, as you can see.
Thank you, Francis. Your story is thrilling. One, don't you think that while you are working on the taxes that URA was put out there, you are actually working as a consultant for them? Then you thought you were challenging, but actually you are acting as a consultant. Number 2, you talked about your first is. You talked about efficiency, expertise, exposure. I did not hear the experience. Okay. Then number 3, I thought that you'd say, I helped this deaf man to become like me. The story did not end well. Or it did not end. Thank you.
Okay. In terms of Revenue Authority, maybe you're right. We were all supporting each other, but I brought on board questions and perspectives that they had not encountered. Like I said, URA was set up, I think, in 1991, and this is year 2000. The tax practice was quite young, but I was very, very exposed and very experienced coming from the UK as a chartered tax advisor. So in my book, I even mentioned some 3-4 people. One of them is Cephas Birungi, who has been on this tax hub sharing with him. He's somebody I worked with very, very closely. Another one actually is, I think, is now a new commissioner, Rebecca Nasimba, Nalongo, Nsumba, yes, that one, and in Tat, and of course Alan Kajina and various other people. But there are also those I didn't mention who were just very different the way they did things. And after the 2005 restructuring, many of those actually fell by the wayside. So the people that I enjoyed really working with were the people in tax policy, Mr. Lawrence Kiza, Moses Kagwa, and also we had, of course, my late friend Simon Kauguwe, doctor, and Justin Zake. So we're really the pioneers of the tax profession in the country in the early 2000s. In fact, in 2004, 2004, I went to Kenya, and I was in Kenya for 5 years and did some really, really interesting things in Kenya there at tax policy. And at the forefront of the East Africa Common Market Area, the EAC, we did really, really interesting things. And I was in Arusha, went to lots of other places which I talk about. So we were supporting each other, but as Crystal said, I had a certain bar which I'd set myself, and I was not going to lower it simply because I've come to Uganda, I've come to Kenya, I've come to Africa. we had to raise it, and we succeeded in raising it. As for the deaf friend, the focus really was not that gentleman. He was a grown-up, he was a cobbler, he had his own life, supported him in his own way, but my focus was on the younger generation. And right now we have a school. We have 122 young people, deaf children, between the age of 8 and 16. And like I said, that school has provided numeracy, literacy to over 1,000 deaf learners. I've set up a vocation training institute, which is again a model of inclusive education. And I give an open invitation here. Michael Sivagala there has not only been to the school, he has also spent a night in our home. So Michael mobilized the tax hub, let them come to Masaka for outreach and retreat experience, and we continue this conversation.
Yes, there's the last question here.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Javira Kionga, and I would like to thank the guest speaker, Mr. Francis, for the wonderful insights. And more to those insights, we can find them in his book. And I'm very excited to have a copy after this session, not only for myself, but for my team that will be inspired by the wisdom you've shared. On a light note, I also come from Masaka. So, Mr. Guest Speaker, if you don't mind me asking you, you've mentioned about disrupting ourselves. As I try to disrupt myself, you talked about not being too comfortable, being technical, because you need to translate that technical knowledge into problem solving. But it takes time. It takes time to appreciate the technicalities around tax law. The tax law is wide. So what grace should I give myself to understand the law and then put it into practice? I find it a little bit, I need some bit of assistance on how I don't get lost into trying to disrupt myself. I will be all over. I don't know if it's clear. How can I be supported to understand how I need to disrupt myself and not be all over, you know?
Okay, technical knowledge is the beginning, because you need that, and not what even you learned at law school or in accounting, but continuous education. Then, however much you know, if you don't apply it, then not only will it be irrelevant, but also you'll not, number one, you'll not earn, because you have to be, you have to earn a living from it. And two, you then don't get even to test that knowledge. So the concept of disruption is that don't be just too comfortable with what you studied some 10 or 8 years ago and staying in that lane, something that I call the competency trap. There are some people who are just so good at what they know that they don't know anything else. And yet things are so mobile, so agile, so dynamic. For instance, you cannot just know tax law, but you don't understand the concept of analytics, for instance. Because if you are a tax practitioner and you're doing the tax health checks, the analog way we used to do 15 years ago, and you're doing that same method now, then you're leaving money on the table. Because even auditors now use analytics and they do 100% auditing. They sample the ledger 100%, whereas before we used to do sampling. You cannot be a tax practitioner and you have not invested in knowledge and understanding of artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is not for techies. It is just basically using even something as basic as ChatGPT to do the heavy lifting for you in terms of research, in terms of precedents, in terms of drafting of opinions. But remember, you have to apply your intellect as a human being, because that is where the value comes from. So you define what is disruption for you, but if you're doing the same thing over and over again, then you're not growing. And if you're not growing, in agriculture, if something is not growing, it is dying. And you may not see it dying, but over time, it dies. And likewise, you may not be dying physically, but you're dying intellectually. And one of the ways to know that you're dying intellectually is when you see all these young people doing amazing things that you are not able to do, yet they are way, way younger than you, and you have a bit more experience. So you be the one to define what it takes to disrupt yourself, but staying in the same place, not physically, but the way you do things in this very dynamic environment we live in is very, very dangerous for you as a professional. And try and widen and broaden your knowledge so that the tax law that you apply is applied in a contextual way. Because the answer for a telecom company like MTN is going to be different to the answer for the telecom company for a financial institutions. You know, something as basic as tax deductibility for bad debts. The laws for financial institutions are very different from manufacturers. And if you do not allow yourself to go beyond the technical, there are lots of other things that are going to happen, and so you find a way of disrupting yourself and speak to those people who have done it very well and very efficiently.
Well, thank you. I believe that brings us to the end of our conversation. Francis, it's been a delight having you. It's been a delight listening to you. I never tire of listening to you. And I believe that many of us here have picked up at least a bite of wisdom here and there that you can begin to apply even now. And if you'd like to get more from this well, there's extensive here, data that you can utilize in your work. I really found this book very enlightening, and I'm sure that when you buy a copy and you read it, you'll love it as much as I've loved it. So thank you, Francis, for your time. I know you're a very busy person. We are humbled by your humility to be with us today, and we wish you well in your endeavors, especially success in your new role as a publisher, a published author, not a publisher, a published author. And to our audience today, thank you so much for listening to us. Have a good night. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. A round of applause.